Do the trashy pulp novels of the world have anything to offer? Are bestsellers all they're cracked up to be? Here at Terrible Book Club, we explore whether you really can judge a book by its cover, or its ridiculous synopsis. You ever passed a book and thought, ugh, who's reading this? We probably are.
Hello and welcome to episode 214 of the Terrible Book Club. I am Paris and this is Chris.
Hello.
This time, I read The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America by Erik Larson, published in 2003, goddamn, that's 22 years ago, by Vintage Books,
wow.
A division of Random House, so big time publisher stuff. I've been wanting to read this for a while, having, heard this book's name floating around in pop culture for the last 20 years. And my friends Ray and Kyle were giving up some books last year, and this happened to be in the pile. So I heeded the call of our Dark Lord to reblow and tossed it on the schedule for 2025, letting those tentacles carry my fate for this year. You will often hear me reference another book called H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil by Adam Seltzer or Seltzer. I'm actually not sure. I'm going to say Seltzer because it reminds me of the beverage that I love.
This nice, crisp, cool ruby red grapefruit by Polar Seltzer that I'm currently enjoying.
Oh, yeah. Ruby red grapefruit. That's one of my favorite flavors. Good choice. And Adam Seltzer's book was published in 2017 by Skyhorse Publishing. Now, you will notice there's a big old gap there of 14 years, right, between these two books being published. I am going to be referencing Seltzer's book a lot because it is the most recent and most accurate scholarship about one half of the book, roughly, well, conceptually one half of the book, physically less than 1/3 of the book, which we'll talk about later.
Okay.
And I had to do this because The Devil in the White City has got some problems, which we will get into today. So anyway, I was able to listen to an audiobook of the Adam Seltzer book in preparation for today's episode. By the power of Patreon and Ko-fi or coffee dollars, I did not need to read two 400-page books, so for that, I am truly grateful. Y'all, thank you for supporting the show. Thank you for...
But you did consume two books for this episode. Again, Paris, I remind you that we attempted to do this new format as a way to cut down on our own work. So I'm sorry with the fact that you got cast to do double research or double book consumption via research, I should say.
That's what happens sometimes when we do nonfiction books, although this book certainly skirts the line between non and fiction, let's say.
Okay. The hyphen in the middle is what you're saying? It's like dancing on that middle part?
Yeah.
It's like, I could go either way.
Oh, yeah.
I can go over to, I can go to fiction. I go.
Oh, yeah. That's Larson. He's right on it. He's dancing across. He's wily. Okay. Anyway, so thank you, patrons, coffee donors. Thank you for your support. It was really helpful because I had to listen to the audiobook of a second book and also get the text of that audiobook. So get the text of the book. So a lot of media consumption, and your patron dollars helped pay for that, and I appreciate that because it was a lot. So thanks. All right. If this is your first time listening to the show, what we do here at the Terrible Book Club is read books that we assume will be bad based on their cover, title, summary, or some combination of the three. Sometimes we read books that our patrons, listeners, or friends recommend. So no matter what, we are typically doing the opposite of what most people do in a bookstore or while they're browsing the internet. We're looking for stuff we think we won't like rather than stuff we think we will. And usually this experiment results in a hilarious and disappointing read, but, once in a while, we are wrong and we actually end up loving or even liking the book. Or rather, liking or even loving the book, whatever. Today, all right, so in addition...
Any order is fine.
Yeah. In addition to our usual barnyard language, today's episode includes the fuckboy classics, such as swindling, fraud, and infidelity, along with some sexism and murder and racism. It's kind of... Today is just a cornucopia of a lot of bad stuff.
I would expect the murder to be, like, first up on the list, because, like, this is about, like, some murdery guys.
You know, you'd
Interesting to me that the rest of...
think that. And
that
yet,
fuckboyism would take precedence over murders in this topic at hand here.
All right, so it's a whole lot of that. I'm going to actually read the back of the book. I have a physical book, and Chris, Can you tell the listeners what happens when I turn the book to the side and you can see the pages? What does that look like to you?
Copious notes. I remember I saw you in person at your house recently.
Oh, yeah.
To give you a gift that I had neglected to give you. Until after the appropriate time was a Christmas gift. But you showed me the book then, and there was already like a lot of notes in there. I feel like it has grown more since that moment.
Yeah.
And it's now just like sort of this pincushion effect of like thoughts that you had to have about this book, like a physical manifestation of how many thorns were in your side.
Yeah, and this was like, I eventually got to the point where I just had to mark whole chapters and be like, you got to go back and look for this, because I just
highlight the whole thing.
Well, because I couldn't. It was just, I already ripped up so many sticky notes to be able to put like, you know, little markers that stick out so you can find. It's a mess. All right.
At a certain point, you realize that the table of contents is really doing that work for you. So
yeah, right.
Just rely on that.
All right. Oh God. Okay. All right. I'm just gonna read the back of the book summary. So I will also read at the very top of the back of the physical book. There is a line that I want you all to remember. Winner of the Edgar Award for Best Fact Crime.
Edgar Award? So there's a award from a man named... Is this an award I should know? It just sounds to me like some guy named Edgar was like, I approve.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But...
And on top of that, the Fact Crime Award is what you said?
Yep.
So an award... Oh, wait, hold on a second. Like, there are facts that... There's unfactual stuff in here, so there was an agency that gives out an award that says this is the least factual book. There are many fact crimes in here. Is that what that is?
That is how I would interpret it, but it is in fact supposed to be the opposite, where this won an award for being the best factual crime book of that period of time or whatever. I'm actually not sure. Yeah.
But they should use factual instead of fact crime, because fact crime award says that, wow, there's sure a lot of fact crimes in here. We have to give it an award. I, Edgar, have decided that this is the
Chris,
worst crime.
you have uncovered something early. Okay, so here's the summary.
Oh.
Bringing Chicago circa 1893 to vivid life, Erik Larson's spellbinding bestseller intertwines the true tale of two men. The brilliant architect behind the legendary 1893 World's Fair, striving to secure America's place in the world, and the cunning serial killer who used the fair to lure his victims to their death. Combining meticulous research with nail-biting storytelling, Erik Larson has crafted a narrative with all the wonder of newly discovered history and the thrills of the best fiction.
Okay, interesting line at the end there for your factual crime book.
Dude, all of those lines are interesting for various reasons. So anyway, we are going to be talking about the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. That's our time and place. We're going to be talking a little bit about the late 1880s, the 1890s. So maybe just like 15 years or so there. All right, so that's our setting. Our notable characters. Daniel Hudson Burnham, accomplished architect who eventually becomes the director of all work at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Sometimes you will also have heard the Chicago World's Fair discussed as the Columbian Exposition, because it was supposed to be like a celebration of Columbus finding America or whatever. So there you go. So that's the one of the men that we're supposedly getting a spellbinding interwoven tale from. And the man with whom he is spellboundedly interwoven is Herman Webster Mudgett. Now, Chris, our first quiz question of the day.
In the characters section.
Oh,
damn.
Get ready. How many known aliases did Herman Webster Mudgett have? Can you guess?
Yours are always so much more like trivia and fact-based, where I was just like asking you your feelings on things. I feel... Okay. I'm gonna guess... Just gut guess. I have no reason to choose this number, but 6, because it's an evil number.
6 is included in the correct total. So I'll give you half credit.
Wait, okay, so one of the digits is 6?
Yes, one of the digits is 6.
Okay. All right, I'll take it. I don't think that's how you pass a math exam, is like, oh, well, you got one of the digits.
Oh, no, this isn't a math exam. This is a terrible book club quiz. So, all right, you got one of the digits.
Okay.
All right, Herman Webster Mudgett, to date, had, as far as we know, 16 aliases that we can connect to him reasonably. They are Henry or Harry Howard Holmes, H.H. Holmes, which is how he is most famously known, Hiram S. Campbell, Henry Mansfield Howard, Harry Gordon, Alexander E. Bond, O.C. Pratt, H.M. Pratt, Alexander E. Cook, A.D. Laws, Mr. Grave, George Howell, A.C. Hayes, H.A. Pease, G.D. Hale, Mr. Hall, and J.A. Judson.
I gotta say, H.A.P.'s is a pretty good one, because it just sounds like he was doing his, like, 2 letters and a last name thing, and, like, he couldn't come up with a last name that day, so he's just like, well, what if it was started with the letter P? What if it was the letter P's? Okay, H.A.P.'s.
Yep. All right,
That's really low on the creativity juice that day, Mr. Mudgett.
All right, so those are the 16 known aliases. For bonus points, how many additional potential aliases are associated with him, but not 100% proven?
All right. I have to get one digit right, and that means I just select 0 through 9, so I have a 10% chance of nailing. Well, if there's multiple digits, it would be like 20%. Right. Okay, I'm not going to get into... I'm turning this into a math exam when it's just a simple trivia question, just based on gut again. Let's say that he potentially has, like, 24 more aliases.
Okay, no, that was incorrect. But your answer... your answer
contains
is...
a digit?
No, your answer is divisible evenly by the true answer, which is 8. So there are 8...
Okay, I really like... Honestly, if all math exams went this way, it's like, well, there's an operation that could get you to the right answer.
Yes. So anyway, so there are 8 other potential aliases that haven't been 100% proven to be connected with him, but are probably him. And those are C.T. Klutz, Mr.
Okay, are you going to do all of them right now?
Mr. Belknap, Mr. Powell, Horace A. Williams, Waldo Bankhorn, Manford R. Peitzel, William C.
Waldo
Green,
Bankhorn slaps, dude.
and H.W. Mishoff.
Waldo Bankhorn is so good that I have to use it in a D&D campaign.
Yeah,
now.
That's pretty good. Okay, before I tell you, so there are a lot of women in this story who are important and often just sort of fixated on as like victims. So I feel like it's good to bring all of them up. However, before I do, I have another query for you.
Oh my god.
Okay.
At least it's a lenient exam.
Okay, so how many wives and girlfriends did we know that Mudgett had? How many wives and girlfriends? What's your total number? And this number fluctuates, so like there's like some potential and some sure. So if you're even in the ballpark between those 2 numbers, I'll give you full credit.
Okay, wow. Like really easy to pass this one. Okay, known conning scammer type, it sounds like, from what the book insinuates, and also all these aliases. Like, you just don't need that many names unless you're running a scam somewhere amidst all of the names.
Correct.
So, probably, like, running scams on ladies in some fashion like that. I'm going to guess that he had 80 known lady associates.
Okay. That is no, that's way too high. There were 6 to 8. So,
okay. Well, I got a digit right if you divide by 10.
That's true.
So I feel like I should pass this exam.
Yes, you got half credit. Okay. So those women were his first and potentially only actual real legal wife is Clara Lovering. Then Myrta Belknap, who believed she was legally married to him, but could have been a scam. Then potentially we have Julia Connor and Gertie Connor. Then maybe Emmeline Segrand, Minnie Williams, maybe also Nanny Williams, and finally Georgiana Yoke.
Was that like a couple of sisters in there, like cousins?
Yeah. So Minnie and Nanny were sisters, and Gertie was Julia's sister-in-law. So Julia was married to this guy named Ned Connor, and Gertie was Ned's sister. But then Minnie and Nanny were sisters, like by birth relation, whatever.
Okay. I wonder if I will retain this information. I don't think I will.
Anyway, those are all the ladies that were swept up in the wake of Mr. Mudgett, who we will most often reference as Holmes, because that was sort of his most used alias and the one that has kind of been passed down in folklore and myth. All right, and then, so we are, again, predominantly in Chicago in 1893, kind of 1880s, 1890s-ish. But then we're going to make some stops in like a dozen or so other U.S. cities like Boston, Minneapolis, Indianapolis. And then we're even going to be in Toronto for a hot second. We're in New Hampshire. We're all over the place.
Full tour.
Yeah.
Come check out H.H. Holmes at the Rift Chamber.
All right. So I will say some of the stuff that I talked about just in the characters and settings section, that's stuff that I pulled from the Seltzer book. The Devil in the White City actually fails to mention most of those details. So we're going to talk about that a little later. So I'm going to start reading my summary to Chris. So Chris has not read The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. I most unfortunately did. So I am going to read the summary. Listeners, please do not crucify me. I am trying to keep this episode as contained as possible. So I have reduced the summary to its most essential elements. So I may skip over things that you thought were really important or cool.
Nice
and
dilution.
Oh well,
it's reduced down. You kept refilling. It's a nice stock of
nice
fact
reduction.
crimes now.
Yeah. Yeah, nice a reduction of the fact crimes. All right, folks. Get your parasols open. Get ready to go on a walk through the World's Fair. All right. It's 1889, and Paris just celebrated the 100th anniversary of their revolution with a magnificent World's Fair and the debut of the Eiffel Tower. Naturally, America must create its own bigger, better, and more American versions of both the fair and the tower.
We painted it with stripes and we put fireworks on it. Check it out.
All right, Chris, I have a question for you. How did America decide... How did America decide where to have its fair? How did they pick Chicago?
I don't know, it's got the most meat there. Just like they're like, there's beef over there. We can sell the beef.
Okay, no, it was not because of the meat packing. Although Chicago did have a very well-known slaughtering district at the time. Congress voted on which city would get to host the fair. But just like today, rich people competed to see who could commit the most money to a city with the biggest pile of rich people money winning the congressional vote. Lucky Chicago was able to outbid New York at the last minute and became the site of the 1893 World's Columbian Expedition, or as we more commonly know it, the Chicago World's Fair.
Sniping it like an eBay buyer, just like sending the letter in slightly quicker. If you send it on like the smaller horse, it actually gets there faster before they send theirs with their bigger horse, and you can get it from out underneath them.
Daniel Burnham, a blue-eyed hottie, was one of the architects selected to work on the construction of the fair. Since notable criminal...
Important architectural qualification. Yes. Haughtiness.
Since notable criminal H.H. Holmes, who is actually Herman Webster Mudgett, aforementioned, also lived in Chicago at the time, and was another blue-eyed hottie, our author, Erik Larson, thought it would be fun to compare and contrast the two men around the events of the fair. This is probably because he read that a doctor named John Capon once said of Holmes, "Great murderers, like great men in other walks of activity, have blue eyes." And Larson thought it was a cool idea or something, even though the color of someone's eyes has no bearing on their character. Anyway, while talking about the sexy blue eyes of both of these dudes, we get the story of how Burnham constructed the fair while Holmes was constructing his infamous quote-unquote murder castle. Except, much of the Holmes details in the book are incorrect, unsubstantiated, and sometimes plain invented, including that his Chicago building was a castle created for murders. So, Chris.
Yeah, this is like the one thing I know about H.H. Holmes possibly is that he had a murder hotel.
Well, Chris, you got another thing coming. So I have a question for you. What was the building actually like structurally, and what was its true purpose?
Well, from what pop culture has sort of imprinted upon me, it's a hotel, and they have like dummy hallways and all sorts of secret passageways so H.H. Holmes could do his murdering. But I get the feeling that you're about to tell me that that's not what it was for. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to guess instead that, I don't know, he like literally just had a house with laundry chutes or something.
Okay, no, but you are right that you know what you know is incorrect. So it was basically a mall. It was like a really long, like a whole block with 2 stories that eventually had a 3rd story. And it just had a lot of businesses in it, like a restaurant, a drugstore, a jeweler, and a barbershop. It was a mall.
Okay.
It was a mall.
And a mall has like maintenance hallways and stuff.
Well,
they're not murder hallways. They're just
kind of, you're onto something there. So the 3rd floor didn't actually begin construction until 1892. And Holmes said he wanted it to be a hotel, but the value in that statement is not the truth of it, that he wanted it to be a hotel. The value is that saying you were building a hotel in preparation for the World's Fair means you get lots of credit. And what do you do with lots of credit? You use that to get a bunch of shit that you have no intention of actually paying for, and so you hide it in the secret rooms and passages in your mall. Instead of women's mutilated bodies, there was just crockery above the kitchen, mattresses in the walls, and furniture between the ceiling and the roof. And what's more is that this was discovered and published in the newspapers, so everyone knew about it, making this whole idea that this building was full of traps with secret rooms not a secret, well before the fair had even begun. Oh, and to boot, there are no records that the 3rd floor or any part of the building was ever used as a hotel, as it was never advertised in hotel registries at the time, or had any record keeping associated with hotels such as a guest book registry or concierge desk, etc. Anyway.
Okay.
So, back to the fair. Burnham and his fellow architects had a practically impossible task. In just over 2 years, they must turn Chicago's swampy Jackson Park into the best fair the Western world had seen in modern times, complete with a building for every state, more buildings for different countries, water features, and of course, a tower, bigger and taller than France's Eiffel, because this is America, gosh dang it!
Like, okay, that's really ambitious to try to build something bigger than the Eiffel Tower. And how long would they have? Like, what, a year or 2 or something?
They had a little over 2 years to build out this entire thing. So we're talking basically impossible.
I don't think that project manager was going to survive that. How long does it take to build like a couple of houses in Boston right now, man? I feel like it's even
it's like 7 years now. So alongside Burnham was Frederick Law Olmsted, who was constantly fretting about his plants and ponds as he was the head of landscaping. Together, they faced such hardships as being called out for union busting, having to hire a woman to design the woman's building for 1/10 of what the male architects were paid, funding trips for people to kidnap indigenous families for exposition, and attending sumptuous meals to fuel their genius architect brains.
Okay.
So, Chris,
the list.
I have a question for you. What TBC joke from a past book has resurfaced totally straight-faced in this one?
What? Okay, hold on a second. I have to, like, remember TBC lore. This actually feels like I am being put to the test here. I feel like there's, like, something Karnaki adjacent here. Like, my Karnaki senses are tingling a little bit.
No Karnaki. So what was... Okay, here's a clue. What was the last thing I just said in the summary?
I lost my train of thought, so I fucking forgot.
It's about how they attended sumptuous meals to fuel their genius architect brains.
Oh, yes. Okay, I was so flagrantly on like the fact that they kidnapped indigenous people that the succulent meals bypassed me.
Yeah, that's understandable. It's understandable.
I don't know. We have a lot of food. I got to throw my hands up on this one, Paris.
Okay, that's fine. So the TBC joke that has resurfaced totally straight-faced in this book is the printing of full menus, of which we get 3.
No, Paris, no.
I am going to
3 menus.
I'm going to read all 3.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Oh, man.
All right.
Paris, I'm going to tell you, every time someone finds out about TBC and that I do that, they're like, what's the worst thing you ever read? I always hit them with the full menu story from Splattering Yet Endearing. And you're going to do 3 for me, right? Oh, no.
All right. Page 98. At precisely 8 p.m., Gage took Hunt and Olmsted by the arm and led the way from the club's reception room to the banquet hall. Then there's like a little cute scrolly thing, and then there's the menu. Oysters, a glass or 2 of Montrachet, consomme of green turtle, Amontillado, broiled shad à la Merkel, cucumbers, potatoes à la Duchesse, filet mignon à la Rossini, Chateau Lafitte and Renabru, Fons de Acata Francis, Pommery sec, sorbet à kirsch, cigarettes, woodcock on toast, asparagus salad.
You had cigarettes on the menu?
Ices, Canton ginger, cheeses, Pont l'Evêque, Roquefort, coffee, liqueurs, Madeira 1815, cigars.
Okay, I guess in the 1890s, like, cigarettes would be on the menu.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty full. There's so much alcohol on this menu. I want everyone to know that every other line I read was an alcohol, just in case you missed that.
Oh. So this is just like, you get fucked up here. Also, There's cheese.
Yeah, there's cheese. There's ice cream. Canton ginger. That's a Chinese ginger ice cream. Ices, Canton ginger.
Okay.
I mean, there's so this was like rich people in Chicago dinner, in 1890.
Yes. And that was menu 1 of 3?
Yeah, sorry, I forget if this was 1890 or 1890. I think it was 1890 when they had that, or 1891. Anyway, so I will say this is a nice way to bring the reader into the culture of the people they're reading about, right? Like, so I don't disagree with the inclusion of this menu. I actually think it was a good idea. However, doing it 2 more times is the thing that I'm like,
okay, yeah, so in Splattering Yet Endearing, like, there was nothing about having to set the scene about the steak restaurant they were going to.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in something like this, but like 3 menus, is it also just booze and cigarettes for the most part?
Yeah, so we had page 98, then page 219, and then again on 314. So let me read the 219 menu, where my note is just LOLK. Because I was like, I can't believe you're doing this again. So on page 219, this is in April 1893, when some of the architects were, having dinner again. Again, it's the same as on page 98. Some of the architects are having dinner, and like, why do we have to do this again? Okay.
Is it different architects?
Yeah, but they all work on the same project. Anyway. Blue points à la Alaska, sauternes. Potages. Consomme Britannier, crème de céleri, amontillado. Hors d'oeuvres. Brissole, Chateaubriand, amandes salées, olives, etc. Poisson. Basse raillée, sauce hollandaise, pomme parisienne. That's French fries, by the way. Myrce Fenière, Moet et Chandon, Perrier Jouet extra special dry. Refève. Filet de beef aux champignons, haricots verts, pomme de chasse. Entrée, risque de veau and côtelette, petit pois. Sorbet, romaine fantasy. Cigarettes. I love that cigarettes is under sorbet. That's really good. Roti.
The nice citrusy, refreshing feeling of a cigarette.
Canard de thé rouge, salade de laitue, ponte cané, dessert, petit moule fantasies, gâteau assorti, bonbons petit fours, fruits assortis, fromage, roquefort et camembert, café, apollinaris, cognac, cordials, cigars.
Paris, can I say that, thinking about that just for a second, a sorbet and a cigarette might actually be opposites, because sorbet, cold, sweet, delicious, cigarette, hot, bitter, and smoky.
Well, I think that's the whole point.
They're opposite. They're conceptual
people,
opposites.
Yeah, rich people dinners seem to have a lot of this, like, layering, right? Also, my apologies to all the French people of the world. My French pronunciation is terrible, and most of these menus are in French. I deeply apologize. Despite my namesake, I know nothing of the French language. So, all right, on page 314.
Just pronounce this next one. Just do it like an American who is terrible at, like, don't even try. Just, like, pronounce all the vowels.
Actually, we're in luck. This is actually a menu from the fair. Okay, so supposedly this is the menu from a ball they had early in the fair's opening. And it says that the food was such. Relishes. Hard-boiled potatoes a la Irish Village. International hash a la Midway Plaisant. Cold dishes. Roast missionary a la Dahomey, west coast of Africa.
Huh?
Jerked buffalo a la Indian Village. Stuffed ostrich.
Okay, this entree list is a little horny.
Yep. Stuffed ostrich a la Ostrich Farm. Boiled camel humps a la the Cairo Street. Monkey stew a la Hagenbeck. The entrees. Fricassee of reindeer a la Lapland. Fried snowballs a la the Ice Railway. Crystallized frappe from Libby Glass Exhibit. The pastry. Wind donuts a la Captive Balloon. Sandwiches assorted, especially prepared by the Leather Exhibit.
Those sandwiches might not be so good if they're leather sandwiches.
Yeah,
we were curing the skin and we cured the meat at the same time. Check it out. Just threw salt on all of it.
Yeah, I just hope no one missed that the dish from the west coast of Africa was roast missionary. Boiled camel humps from Cairo. Like, I don't...
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the flavor of the fair.
Also, there was the first one was missionary, the second one was jerked, and then the third one was humps. So the childish part of my brain was immediately going off.
Anyway, menus.
I can't believe it, Paris.
I know. It's really incredible. All right, back into the summary here. Now that we've had our menu break. Nice and hungry. All right. Building this monstrous park and human zoo was 1 feat, but powering and protecting it was another. Burnham created a police force, water purification system, and a fire department, complete with a fireboat, to prevent a second Great Chicago Fire happening at the fair. We even get a little bit of the electricity wars. Westinghouse, having recently bought out Tesla's more efficient alternating current patents, underbid General Electric and their direct current by a full 2/3 to be the ones to light the exposition. So just ruthless underbidding.
Wow.
Despite all of this preparation, problems plagued it all. Wild winds destroyed roofs and collapsed buildings. Eternal rain soaked the final week of preparation. Workers died. The sole female architect got into a decoration fight with the lady managers and got so upset she got carted away to an asylum and other such calamities.
Okay. It's like, you fucking bitch, I'm gonna say it.
I actually forgot to fact check that. That was one thing
Take her
I forgot
away.
to do.
She threw all the decorations away.
It sounded ridiculous. I did mean to fact check that and forgot. So that's outstanding, folks. I don't know if that's actually true. All right, Chris, I have a question for you before we continue.
Okay, more questions.
What famous person's father worked on the fair as a carpenter and furniture maker? And so Larson claims that this job inspired the famous child's later career.
Oh, I don't know any famous late 19th century people that well, Paris.
Well, the kid was famous, not the father who actually worked on the fair. This is a big stretch. It's a big stretch. Someone you have heard of.
1920s, 1930s, like,
yeah.
I don't, Clark Gable.
Okay. No.
Who's the guy in Casablanca?
That man was Elias Disney, and everybody clapped. So any reference to this is circular.
Okay, yeah.
And given the less than reliable treatment that the Holmes side of the story got, I remain extremely skeptical, especially since Larson claims that working on the fair somehow inspired Walt's later theme park ventures, despite there being no evidence of that. The Disney family doesn't even make this connection. And, like, Walt wasn't born until 1901 and also thought his dad sucked, actually. So, like, I don't know how Elias working on the fair in 1893 would have inspired Walt, because Walt wasn't born until 1901. And by all accounts, Elias was kind of a jerk and wasn't really the kind of dad to be like, kids, remember when I worked on the fair? Like, it is a complete invention by Larson. And now, because this book has been out for 20 years.
Tenuous.
Because this book has been out for 20 years, if you search anything about Disney and the World's Fair, it comes up as true history. Because Larson imagined that it could have been possible. He wrote it in this book, and now people think that's real. It's not real. It's not substantiated by anything. It is a far-flung guess that Larson made that has now been turned into fact just because this book has sat around for 2 decades without anyone actually confronting whether or not the research in it is true. So, that sucks.
Yeah, the misinformation travels fast.
Yep. Anyway, the fair opened on May 1st, 1893, despite not being completely finished, including Ferris's wheel, elevators, and a variety of other aspects. Then, banks start to fail that first week, and fair attendance plummets to levels below profitability. Also, Buffalo Bill's Wild West show is funneling patrons away from the fair because they had a spite set up extremely close by after being turned down as an exhibition of the fair itself. Which, good on you, Bill.
The Larry David maneuver.
Oh yeah, Buffalo Bill is like the most Larry David dude of the time. Actually, that's a really great. That's a great comparison.
My spite fair.
Okay. July brought a powerful storm and fire that killed yet more workers and emergency response personnel. Eventually, the bank failures became railroad failures, and other types of companies also started to fail, so costs had to be cut at the fair. Although the fair did eventually break the current attendance record by hundreds of thousands, the Chicago World's Fair ultimately ended rather dismally on October 31st with the shooting death of Chicago's mayor just days before by a mentally unstable man named Prendergast. Also, there was no plan made for the thousands of people who had come to work and be employed by the fair who were all at once without work or sustenance at the start of winter, making Chicago fairly unpleasant to be in that winter of 1893 to 1894. All right, look, I know no one picked up this book to read about the architects who built the Chicago World's Fair, so let's cut over to the part about H.H. Holmes, the most famous alias of Herman Webster Mudgett. It's honestly impressive how poor the author's research on Holmes was and how long it took for the record to be corrected. As Larson tells it, Holmes was a sexually deviant serial killer whose life's purpose was trapping and killing as many women in his murder circus hotel as he could, just to get off. There's no evidence to support this at all, especially the jerking off and the murder hotel parts. Chris, I have a question for you.
Oh, this can't be a good one.
What critical fact did Larson miss when writing this book regarding the building's construction?
Oh, okay. This is a freeform one for me. I'm going to guess that he didn't even know it had doors, because it seems like he didn't do good research. So he was like, they're all trapped because there's no doors on this place. I forgot to build the doors, but then if you look at a record, there's just like a door there. There's many doors, in fact. And he thought they were all, I don't know, secret passageways that seem to like swing out to the outside. It must be an access of some point that only H.H. Holmes can see when it's just a door.
You know, that's a really good, that's conceptually
a really
that
good
works.
What? There can't be a good anything.
Conceptually that works. So the critical fact he didn't notice or find because he didn't do good research was that when Holmes chose the site, of this building that was essentially just a mall, but that everyone now remembers as the murder hotel. When he chose the site of that building in 1887, he didn't know the World's Fair was also going to be in that location because the site would not be chosen for another 2.5 years, because that is how time works.
No, you see, he manipulated it from the inside as a pervert. He jerked off at the right senator. Yep. I don't know.
Also, there was never any evidence of the traps and torture devices that have been mythologized over time, nor were there credible claims that anyone ever saw anything like gas chambers or spiked closets or rooms created expressly for murder. In fact, it's pretty difficult to connect him to the majority of the murders people like to credit him with. The truth is that Holmes was a shitty fuckboy con man and compulsive liar who barely got away with one crime and one marriage before he had to hop a train to a new city and a new bride and commit some perfunctory murder to keep his schemes under wraps. The dude was everywhere. New Hampshire, Vermont, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Texas, Illinois, Massachusetts. In fact, at one point, shortly before he was finally caught, he was shuffling around 3 groups of people to various cities while none of them knew of the other 2 groups but him.
Impressive to do in the late 19th century, to be honest with you.
Yeah. He even showed up at the doorstep of his first wife and his parents' house. And, Chris, I have another question for you. What was his excuse for his prolonged absence and new wife?
Diarrhea.
No? You want to try again?
No, diarrhea.
Okay,
like,
final answer.
I had to go for like 3 years. Sorry, it was bad. It was really bad.
So he disappears for like, I forget if it was 5 or 7 years or something. Shows up back at wife 1 and his parents' house and says, "Sorry, baby, I was hit by a train, and then one of the hospital staff encouraged a trepanation procedure that saved my life but wiped my memory, and that hospital staff is now my wife. Whoops."
Diarrhea would have been a better excuse, actually, I think.
So obviously, like, he was never hit by a train, he didn't have any trepanation procedure, like, this was just his really bad excuse. And his wife and parents totally bought it. And they were like, "Oh my God, we're so glad you're okay. It's fine that you have a new wife." Yeah, really weird.
Okay.
Shortly after this, he was finally arrested. And Chris, for what crime was he arrested and where?
Diarrhea in the toilet room, the bathroom.
Okay.
He did it all over the toilet bathroom.
Can you actually try? I would really love it if you tried.
No, okay, sorry. Sorry. I just saw my opportunity, really. Tax evasion? They all get him for tax evasion, right?
All right, that's not far off. Okay, where did this arrest take place?
Well, just for like drama's sake, like Chicago, like at the World's Fair, like he was about to step on the Ferris wheel for the first time, and they're like, "Stop there, Mr. Holmes," or should I say Mudgett? And then he has diarrhea, and falls off the Ferris wheel. They arrest him.
No, so the Pinkertons finally tracked him down in Boston, for horse theft that he committed in Texas, and also because of an insurance scheme. So it was a little bit of both. It was like the insurance scheme and the horse theft, and it was kind of like whatever they could pin on him.
That guy really wanted that horse back. He was like, "Man, that guy took my horse. And what do you mean it's in Boston? He could walk the horse back." Honestly,
that was kind of one of his biggest missteps. Is like he just defrauded the wrong horse guy, and amongst other things. So he is finally tracked down and arrested in Boston, for both this horse theft that he committed in Texas and then also insurance fraud for faking his best friend and business partner's murder. Until authorities realized it was actually that guy who was dead. And that 3 of those dudes' kids were missing. So the charges then changed from insurance fraud to straight up murder. Now, Holmes didn't kill these people because he was horny for any of them, but because he had conned himself into a corner and couldn't figure out what to do. Alas, this of course just made things worse, and he was imprisoned, represented himself for part of the trial, wrote an autobiography which was full of lies, just like his life, which had further lies added to it by the editor, and then he was finally hanged. His confessions are even chock full of lies, where he would admit to having murdered people who were verified as alive so it's very difficult to know if even those he confessed to murdering actually died by his hands. Larson would love us to believe that America was changed by Burnham and Holmes, but I don't see what the Holmes part of the equation really brings to this idea. He was not America's first serial killer, or even a serial killer at all, but he did certainly embody the American tradition of grift.
Yeah. Wait, this book claimed that he was the first serial killer in America?
Yeah, that is the myth that this book and a lot of other pop literature will say.
Okay, but it was like late 19th century. America was a thing for like 100 plus years at this point.
Isn't that on its face obviously not true? Yeah, fun.
Yeah.
So the fair itself had an impact, but Larson's account of the White City didn't really leave me with the intended afterglow. Sometimes cool, famous people had chance meetings at the fair, and it was certainly an architectural and landscaping feat. But ultimately, it feels like America just got, PBR, light bulbs, and a small side of labor rights tussles as a treat, which doesn't have the grand weight I was anticipating. The end.
I do feel like you restrained yourself in that summary, Paris, so I congratulate you.
I did. I tried to keep it concise. All right, folks, let's talk about technical construction. There were no typos. That was fine. It was edited. Formatting, however. Oh boy. All right. The formatting was annoying for two reasons. One, this is one of the few books where I have encountered where the chapters shift, and I don't love it because there's often no transition. It's just not knit together well. Let me just read some ends and beginnings of chapters so you get what I'm talking about. As if anyone needed extra pressure, the New York Times warned, the failure of the fair or anything short of a positive and pronounced success would be a discredit to the whole country and not to Chicago alone. And that ends one of the chapters. The next chapter. In November 1891, Julia Connor announced to Holmes she was pregnant. Now she told him he had no choice but to marry her. By the way, that is not fact. That is that one sentence right there. That is a guess based on no real evidence. Yeah. So anyway, I just don't think the chapter flipping and flopping really, they don't flow together very well. There are also sometimes breaks in chapters where he'll just move to another topic, and I don't know. The way that Larson tries to connect things feels more desperate than inventive. And so my example for this is the very beginning of the book is particularly absurd, where we have to start on the Titanic because, wowee, let's try to connect as many big events and American stuff as possible. So I'm going to read...
Like always trying to bring it back to the Skywalkers in the Star Wars.
Right,
you always have to have this like, remember the Titanic? That was in the 19th century too.
Well,
Fuck
no.
you, Titanic. Get your big ass out of here. Always involved in every 19th century anything.
Well, no, the Titanic disaster was 1914. That's the 20th century.
Oh, okay.
But
yeah,
still, listen, we're talking about the same 30-year period, right? So
yes.
Anyway, I'm going to read Larson's account and then the historical documentation he bases this on. And I think this is a great micro of the macro problem of this book. I'm just going to read the most important part, the first 2 pages, because he does come back to this whole Titanic thing, and but it's unnecessary. So I'm just going to read a little bit of it. The date was April 14th, 1912, a sinister day in maritime history. But of course, the man in Suite 6365, Shelter Deck C, did not yet know it. What he did know was that his foot hurt badly, more than he had expected. He was 65 years old and had become a large man. His hair had turned gray, his mustache nearly white, but his eyes were as blue as ever, bluer, at this instant by proximity to the sea. His foot had forced him to delay the voyage, and now it kept him anchored in his suite, while the other first-class passengers, his wife among them, did what he would have loved to do, which was to explore the ship's more exotic precincts. The man loved the opulence of the ship, just as he loved Pullman palace cars and giant fireplaces, but his foot problem tempered his enjoyment. He recognized that the systemic malaise that caused it was a consequence, in part, of his own refusal over the years to limit his courtship of the finest wines, foods, and cigars. The pain reminded him daily that his time on the planet was nearing its end. Just before the voyage, he told a friend, "This prolonging of a man's life doesn't interest me when he's done his work and has done it pretty well." The man was Daniel Hudson Burnham, and by now, his name was familiar throughout the world. He was an architect and had done his work pretty well in Chicago, New York, Washington, San Francisco, Manila, and many other cities. He and his wife, Margaret, were sailing to Europe in the company of their daughter and her husband for a grand tour that was to continue through the summer. Burnham had chosen this ship, the RMS Olympic of the White Star Line, because it was new and glamorous and big. At the time he booked passage, the Olympic was the largest vessel in regular service, but just 3 days before his departure, a sister ship, a slightly longer twin, had stolen that rank when it set off on its maiden voyage. The twin, Burnham knew, was at that moment carrying one of his closest friends, the painter Francis Millet, over the same ocean, but in the opposite direction. As the last sunlight of the day entered Burnham's suite, he and Margaret set off for the first-class dining room on the deck below. They took the elevator to spare his foot the torment of the grand stairway, but he did so with reluctance, for he admired the artistry and the iron scrollwork of its balustrades and the immense dome of iron and glass that flushed the ship's core with natural light. His sore foot had placed increasing limitations on his mobility. Only a week earlier, he had found himself in the humiliating position of having to ride in a wheelchair through Union Station in Washington, D.C., the station he had designed. The Burnhams dined by themselves in the Olympic's first-class salon, then retired to their suite, and there, for no particular reason, Burnham's thoughts returned to Frank Millet. On impulse, he resolved to send Millet a mid-sea greeting via the Olympic's powerful Marconi wireless. Burnham signaled for a steward. A middle-aged man in knife-edge whites took his message up 3 decks to the Marconi room adjacent to the officers' promenade. He returned a few moments later, the message still in his hand, and told Burnham the operator had refused to accept it. Footsore and irritable, Burnham demanded that the steward return to the wireless room for an explanation. So that is Larson's account. I'm going to read...
Where is he getting this information from?
Great question. I'm going to read the source material that he is working with. This is Burnham's diary. So, in Larson's book, he talks about April 14th, right? The diary only has April 15th and 15th, 16th, 18th, 19th, and 20th, from which I will read. All right. April 15th. This morning, the steward told us that an accident had occurred on the Titanic, sister ship to the one we are on. She sailed from Cherbourg on the 10th. Later in the day, we learned via Marconi that she had struck an iceberg and had gone down. Later yet came a list of survivors, 675, mostly women and children. My chief of decoration of the fair of 1893 and vice chairman of the Commission of Fine Arts, Frank D. Millet, whom I loved, was aboard of her, and with him was Major Archibald Butt, President Taft's military secretary. Their names are not on the list of survivors, and probably they have gone down, thus cutting off my connection with one of the best fellows of the fair. April 16th, breakfasted in our rooms, went out and read list of Titanic survivors telegraphed from the Carpathia, which is carrying them to New York. Frank's name is not among them, nor is Archie Butt's. My steward is in his grief. His son was a steward on the Titanic and has gone down. The ship is in gloom. Everybody has lost friends, and some of them near relations. I found Kirsten, partner of our Boston client Filene, is aboard. April 18. Breakfasted alone in the main dining room. Found a list of subscribers to Titanic Relief Fund amounting to £770 or $3,850, headed by Lord Ashburton. Subscribed $100. April 19. After dinner, Charles H. Thorne, my Charles, appeared. I feel cheated. He has been aboard all the time, and I did not know it. This comes from my sore foot and keeping in our staterooms. A pleasant evening with Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. April 20. Up at 5, getting ready for shore. No further news of the Titanic. I still do not know whether our dear Frank Millet came through or is lost. Landed at Cherbourg at 1:30 p.m. after stopping at Plymouth. Albert and Ethel Wells on the pier said goodbye to Charles Thorne and went to the beautiful Casino Hotel on the beach where we lunched, dined, and put up for the night. So you see, what is happening here is Larson is taking this diary entry where Burnham is like, oh man, I think my friend might have gone down on the Titanic, and spinning it out into like, and making it more dramatic and being like, well, what if he sent him a telegram and they were like, we're not taking telegrams right now. And then he was like desperately thinking about it. But like, that's not what fucking happened. And I take issue with that because this is history we're talking about.
I got a problem with that one too, man. Like, if you're presenting your book as like this nonfiction, even though like expressly at the back, I think that last line about like the best parts of fiction is like, you know, he's going in there understanding like, yeah, I'm wholesale making shit up over here for fun, but he's not clearly telling you, the reader, that he's doing that. I'm assuming you, as a person that would read a foreword or like author's note at the beginning, you love that shit. You might have been fine with all this if he like drew a line, was like, hey, I'm having a little fun here.
Funny you should mention that. I was going to read this later, but there is a foreword. It is called Evil's Imminent, a Note. It is one page. It is page, Roman numeral 11. It is before the book actually starts. It is, again, a foreword. In Chicago at the end of the 19th century, amid the smoke of industry and the clatter of trains, there lived two men, both handsome, both blue-eyed, and both unusually adept at their chosen skills. Again, he's really hung up on how hot and blue-eyed both these men are, which is fucking baffling. Anyway, each embodied an element of the great dynamic that characterized the rush of America toward the 20th century. One was an architect, the builder of many of America's most important structures, among them the Flatiron Building in New York and Union Station in Washington, D.C. The other was a murderer, one of the most prolific in history and harbinger of an American archetype, the urban serial killer. Although the two never met, at least not formally, their fates were linked by a single magical event, one largely fallen from modern recollection, but that in its time was considered to possess a transformative power nearly equal to that of the Civil War. In the following pages, I tell the story of these men and this event, but I must insert here a notice. However strange or macabre some of the following incidents may seem, this is not, italic emphasis on not in the text, not a work of fiction. Anything between quotation marks comes from a letter, memoir, or other written document. The action takes place mostly in Chicago, but I beg readers to forgive me for the occasional lurch across state lines, as when the staunch, grief-stricken Detective Geyer enters that last awful cellar. I beg forbearance, too, for the occasional side journey demanded by the story, including excursions into the medical acquisition of corpses and the correct use of Black Prince geraniums in an Olmstedian landscape. Beneath the gore and smoke and loam, this book is about the evanescence of life and why some men choose to fill their brief allotment of time engaging the impossible, others in the manufacture of sorrow. In the end, it is a story of the ineluctable conflict between good and evil, daylight and darkness, the white city and the black.
Okay, so he's not only being like, it's all true, but also like, fuck you if you question me about it a little bit.
Yeah, I have a huge problem with this forward. Huge.
Yeah.
Because if you read
I also have a big problem with
you don't question a goddamn thing in the text, and you should question all of it. Every section.
I questioned the handsome part, and I'm looking at some pictures of Daniel Byrne.
I was going to ask
H.H.
you.
Holmes.
I was going to ask you to do this.
So, I mean, like, I think this guy's criteria for handsome is like mustache is really what's going on, because like both dudes have like power stashes for the most part. Daniel Burnham, I guess you could maybe call handsome if you like a sort of like Tafty sort of handsomeness.
Yeah, like a thick man, a thick bear of a man, right?
Thick man,
sure.
Thick stash. Like if you like that kind of shit, like, you know, sure. H.H. Holmes, I don't know. He's got just like too much mustache hair going on for me. It's,
right, and so
it's powerful.
The thing is, this is like another point, and again, I'm sorry, listeners, I will return to my second point in the section of formatting that I found annoying, but we are about to wrap this up. So, that is another great example of the liberties, the cherry picking that Larson is engaging in, whereby people's descriptions of Holmes varied. Some people said that he was attractive, but many others said he was rather meh looking. He was a diminutive man. He was about 5'8", slight. Plenty of people did not find him attractive. There are a handful of people who say that he was handsome, but again, many others who didn't. And as we all know as humans on this planet, like, you know, people being hot or not is pretty subjective. So I find it really odd that he fixates on how hot these two guys are the whole time. I mean, he kind of drops the Burnham hotness. Like, it's pretty heavy early on in the book where he's like, oh man, Burnham's so hot. Even his like architectural partner thought he was hot. And you're like, what the fuck? Like, where did that come from? And then he drops that kind of early on, but the Holmes being hot stuff continues because, you know, the version of Holmes that Larson has spun is this sexy ladies man, but like, that's not really substantiated by any firsthand account. Again, it's very divided over whether people thought he was hot. Some people thought he was like pretty ugly, actually, or like average looking. So the idea that like he's such a Casanova that women can't resist him, like that's not really borne out in the evidence. He was definitely a smooth talker by all accounts, which like I wish he had focused on that part. Right. A charmer and a smooth talker. Women were not attracted to him because he was like super hot, but because he was charming. And instead, Larson completely fucking misses that and just goes for like, but he was hot though. And it's like, no! Anyway, all right, wrapping this up. The other part of the formatting that really bothered me was that there are few direct citations or footnotes on a page in the book. So you have to go hunting in the appendix and like go through the footnotes and the notes in the back. And the sources are sometimes cited pretty minimally. So you would actually have to do a bit of legwork to determine if what Larson is talking about is true or like situated in enough truth to be plausible. And this diary example aboard the Titanic from Burnham that I gave, I think is a great example of that, where it's like, okay, Burnham was on the Titanic at the time. Millet did die aboard, Burnham was on the Olympic at the time. His friend Millet did die aboard the Titanic, but like this whole dramatic scene of him sending a telegram and like thinking about him, like that, there's nothing to bear that out. And this is a style of book that is apparently popular where you base things in a historical account, but you spin them up to be more dramatic. I personally hate that and find that very deceptive, especially in something like this that's like, this is not fiction. And it's like, but it is fiction. But you are fictionalizing real events. Like, and I don't like it. It would
even be fine. I would say it could even be fine if you just spun into styles like maybe that, like you just say this is a possibility of could have happened. Imagine Burnham trying to do this, perhaps.
Yeah, there's a way to have artfully done that. But I guess he just wants to pull you in so much that I think he trips over the line, right? And even, you know, and there are occasions when he does directly quote someone or reference where it's from, but mostly it's just kind of loose and rolling around in the text. And like, I know this is a pop history book, but come on, man, just make the citations at the bottom of the page. People who don't want to read them will ignore them, and then the rest of us won't hate you, and I don't have to comb through this appendix and redo your research to figure out if what you're saying is real. Okay, and last point here is like, I am very aware that I am relying heavily on a single source for the Holmes stuff, but that's for two very good reasons. And the first is that Seltzer's book is the best, most reasonable and researched take out there, to my knowledge. There's very, very little else to choose from, and everything else suffers from the same problem Larson's does, where it's just sort of this, like, this Ouroboros where they're all referencing the same stuff, and they're not really looking beyond and doing deeper research that Seltzer did. And secondly, I am not a historian or a famous professional author writing a mass market book that I am publishing as a factual account of history. I am a reader and book critic doing my best with little means. I do not have the time and reach of someone with access to historical archives like Seltzer, or the money and professional support of someone like Larson. So, I did my best. And the fact that me, a casual reader and book critic, was able to find this many holes in the text is a fucking problem. It's a big ol' problem. Woof.
Big problem.
I don't know. Punctuation was fine. It was awkward sometimes, but I was so focused on the factual stuff that cover art was fine. It's whatever. It's kind of boring. All right, moving on to plot construction.
You gotta score it.
Oh,
you gotta score it.
What am I scoring it for? Technical construction.
Whatever you Whatever you put, technical construction. Yeah, whatever your dimension is,
that's
man.
Gonna be a
number.
It's going to be a 0 for technical construction.
Okay. All right.
Plot construction. So we're going to talk about general coherence and rules following, and for this, I'm going to be talking about factual inaccuracies. We're like bordering on absolute nonsense in parts. Larson's leaps from fact to fiction really defy the gravity of reason sometimes. So, like, listen to how he describes Burnham and his architectural firm partner, Rook. Rook dies pretty early on in the story, which is why I didn't really include him. He's very important kind of in the setup, but dies early on. So, Burnham and Rook were, like, besties, architectural firm partners. They did a lot of work together, really close. On page 20, we have this section. Burnham took to Root immediately. He admired Root's white skin and muscular arms, his stance at the drafting table. They became friends, then partners. They recorded their first income 3 months before the Panic of 1873 snuffed the nation's economy. But this time, Burnham stuck with it. Something about the partnership with Root bolstered him. It filled an absence and played to both men's strengths. They struggled for their own commissions, and in the meantime hired themselves out to other, more established firms. So there's like a weird romanticization, some might say sexualization, between the men there, and that, I don't know why you would do that, because they don't have that kind of relationship. So I am starting this book on page 20 and reading that and going, oh, were they like together? No, they weren't. Why would you write about two friends like that? I find that very odd. And again on 26, as their firm prospered, the character of each partner began to emerge and clarify. Burnham was a talented artist and architect in his own right, but his greatest strength lay in his ability to win clients and execute Root's elegant designs. Burnham was handsome, tall, and strong, with vivid blue eyes, all of which drew clients and friends to him the way a lens gathers light. Daniel Hudson Burnham was one of the handsomest men I ever saw, said Paul Sterrett, later to lead construction of the Empire State Building. He joined Burnham and Root in 1888 as an all-purpose helper. It was easy to see how he got commissions. His very bearing and looks were half the battle. He had only to assert the most commonplace thing, and it sounded important and convincing. Sterrett recalled being moved by Burnham's frequent admonition, "Make no little plans, they have no magic, to stir men's blood." So, like, my problem here is that he's only relying on a quote from a single person. And maybe that was that person's interpretation of him, but, like, was there any cross-referencing? Like, there's no like, second supporting section, right? Where, like, oh, this other person also said this.
This guy said he was handsome.
Right. So, I mean, and maybe there was other supporting evidence, but it's not noted in the text, and it makes me question it, especially because all the Holmes stuff is basically complete garbage. So anyway, like, just kind of weird descriptions of people, and it's hard to know if that's based on something real or just like a one-off quote by one dude, which may not have really represented the entirety of the truth, right? Another big hole in, like, coherence and stuff. There's no discussion of the treatment of the people who were kidnapped or misled into living at the fair as exhibits, which, like, you know, kind of important.
I feel like that should be a pretty big point, actually.
Yeah, when you're like, this book is about the World's Fair, but we're just going to gloss over all the indigenous people either straight up kidnapped or lied to about the fair. I think I noted maybe 5 sentences in the entire nearly 400-page book that even glance off this topic as it sped by to formulate another lusty account of Holmes, right? Like, so
and the blue eyes. It's really important that I have to remind you about the blue eyes.
Yeah, so there's just no engagement with that. Again, there's maybe 5 sentences that even mention, like, oh yeah, this guy got hired to go bring back this group of people from this area. I don't know, he died, whatever. We got these people. And it's like, you have people from all over the world. There's no thought given. And I know just from, from my own educational background that people were, like, imprisoned. That, like, this wasn't like ooh, these people came here as, like, on, like, and it was very exploitative, right? Because they often would have groups of people from different countries act in a way that the Western world thought they acted and not actually as they really behaved. So none of that. There is no discussion of any of this, which is like just a gaping fucking crater in this whole story, because that's...
Especially if you want to be like, and they were evil and masterminds of some terrible things. Like, that feels like an easy inclusion.
But I think the problem is that he talks about the fair as the white city and the rest of Chicago as the black city. And so I think for Larson, the white city has to live up to that purity, right? And so everything to do with the fair itself, it's like even the bad stuff, he kind of is just as like, well, that's what they had to do. You know, that's fine. That's just what happened. That's how it was. Like, there's no real investigation or engagement with the difficult parts.
Why does this book feel like he came up with the idea before he did the research?
Oh,
and then
that is absolutely my guess, is that he was like, well, this is a cool thing to write about, but who's going to pick up a book about the World's Fair? I know. What if I write about this guy who we all think is a killer, who was alive at the same time? You know, because, I mean, no one's going to pick up a book that's just about the World's Fair, right? Like, maybe some people will, but it's not as sensational, certainly.
Yes.
Anyway, so there's that giant crater there. Another thing to note is, like, there's you may remember in my summary that I talk about how the mayor of Chicago was shot a couple days before the fair ended and was killed by a man named Prendergast. And there are very, very short chapters throughout the book about Prendergast. There are so few of them and they are so short that I just lumped them in with the Chicago chapters. And all it amounts to is a guy with some mental instability, like, imagined that he was the mayor's best friend because he supported the mayor's campaign. And then he shoots the mayor when he doesn't get a job that he had, like, fantasized about having. And Larson tries to, like, weave this in as, like, another thread. And it just felt like another desperation in construction, like... And there are even some other random people that he tries to toss in for flavor that just end up feeling, I don't know, disconnected, and they deflate kind of instantly. He's like, oh, and there was this guy, he was a real ladies' man, and he, like, met this lady and married her, but then he cheated on her a bunch. Anyway, the guy who invented, like, juicy fruit gum, and you're like, oh, all right, like, whatever, man. Like, I don't... it feels very disjointed, especially... as the book goes on. Like, I feel like it starts out pretty strong with the World's Fair stuff because there's clearly a lot of detailed research in here about Burnham and Root and the architects. The second it cuts over to Holmes, you can immediately smell bullshit because there's very few quotes or citations or references. And then as the book goes on, even the Chicago stuff starts to kind of fall apart. The chapters get chunkier, shorter. It's like, it doesn't feel very well connected. Yeah, it's a bummer. All right, rules following. So, of the 336 pages of core book, so we're not talking the foreword, the notes, the appendix, or the afterword, I categorized every page by what it was talking about.
Oh my God.
I made a spreadsheet. So, all right.
Good Lord, Paris. You categorized every page?
So, of the 336, again, pages of the core book, generously, there are 218 pages about Burnham and Chicago and 118 pages about Holmes. Now, some of these pages are half pages, quarter pages, so again, this is generous. As you can see, that is a 2/3 to 1/3 ratio, right?
Yes.
Right? So... already a little
even if your
suspect.
math is a little fudgy, like, it's gonna end up somewhere in that area.
Right, and interestingly enough, most of the Holmes content is actually from after the time he got arrested, because naturally, like, that's where you would have, I guess,
records.
More easily discovered records, right? So,
yes.
And so a quarter of the Holmes content is after he gets arrested. So you're talking about a very small part of the book about Holmes at the time of the World's Fair, right? So, like, the Holmes pages start to dwindle rapidly in comparison to the Burnham chapters. It's plain that there just wasn't enough information, which is why Larson really had to puff up and invent things. And even with that, the Holmes chapters are steadily pretty short until after his arrest, when there's, obviously more recorded information or easily discoverable information. This is really an idea that he should have contributed some chapters to in this whole enterprise to set the stage of Chicago during the fair, not to try to make it a book of dual focus due to the dearth of information for one half. I just do not understand why this choice was made, other than, hey, maybe people will pick this up if they think it's about a serial killer, right? Like, that's the only conclusion I can come to.
Yeah?
Chris, I have a question for you.
Oh, good.
What research pitfall, born of his own hubris, did Larson potentially fall prey to while writing this book?
The thing I mentioned before, where you have a hypothesis before you even start doing research, and so you just cherry pick everything to make it look like you're right.
Well, I mean, that's something we can guess at, but this has more grounding in fact, let's say. This other thing.
He had diarrhea and he shit all over the primary sources, and now
you are really focused on diarrhea today.
That's I got the callback happening here. I feel I don't know, just misciting things, or missing the word "not" in some sort of source, and thinking that it was the opposite of what it meant.
I think that because Larson refused to use the internet back in 2000 when he was researching for this, I think he missed deeper and better evidence that had been digitized. Though it is possible those things weren't digitized until 15 years later when Seltzer was working on his book. Still, Adam Seltzer used both in-person shoe leather methods, as he is a Chicagoan himself and a historian, and the magic of the internet, making his Holmes account superior. Larson even says on page 395 in the afterward, he says, "I do not employ researchers, nor did I conduct any primary research using the internet. I need physical contact with my sources, and there's only one way to get it. To me, every trip to a library or archive is like a small detective story. There are always little moments on such trips when the past flares to life like a match in the darkness. On one visit to the Chicago Historical Society, I found the actual notes that Prendergast sent to Alfred Trude. I saw how deeply the pencil dug into the paper. I've tried to keep my citations as concise as possible. I cite all quoted or controversial material, but omit citations for facts that are widely known and accepted. For the 2 murder scenes, I document my reasoning and my approach and cite the facts upon which I relied. The citations that follow constitute a map. Anyone retracing my steps ought to reach the same conclusions as I."
Okay.
Yeah.
Just saying nah to the internet seems like a mistake. Because why? You could at least see what sources are out there and go yourself to verify if you want to touch the physical thing.
Right. Not to mention the digitization of stuff in archives has been happening for decades. I mean, again, it's hard for me to know if the digitized stuff that Seltzer found had been digitized in the interim, right? Between Devil in the White City and Seltzer's book. But I feel pretty strongly that if Larson had just not had such a stick up his ass about the internet, he probably would have found better sources. And probably would have created a better book that was more accurate. So
yep.
I just take issue with how haughty he is in both the forward and afterward when talking about the veracity of his work, when so much of it is not correct, and that he straight up made up things. I really take issue with that. I just think that he could have been so much more upfront about it. And, he often cites that the Holmes parts were his attempt at writing in cold blood, like Truman Capote. First of all, the hubris to compare yourself to such an author is wild to me. But he's I was trying to get in the mind of the killer and blah, blah, blah. And because in cold blood was, if those of you who've read it, I don't want to say it's similar, but what it did was, Truman Capote wrote about a killer who was real. But he wrote a fictionalized version of the events of the killings, right? And because you can't be there, obviously, the author was not there when the killer was killing, he really kind of romanticized it and tried to get in his head and things like that. But I feel like that was very upfront in Cold Blood.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone knew that it was more of an artistic interpretation of a real thing. Whereas with this, I just feel like Larson is he's really trying to say that his conclusions and guesses about history are fact when they are not. And I find that very disturbing to be out there as like a pop culture book, especially because this isn't like a book that's like locked up for historians, like that only archivists and researchers are ever going to find. This is a popular mass market text. And like I said, a lot of the things in it have become historical canon, even though they're not true, like the Disney thing and other things about Holmes, where you see all this like circular referencing. It's a really dangerous thing. And I think it sucks. And again, like this, this is like small potatoes compared to the mis and disinformation age in which we currently live. And I'm sure that because this book was written, probably started work 24 years ago or so, came out 22 years ago, like circumstances were different at the time, but it almost feels like the beginning of the end to me. Like this was like a harbinger of what was to fucking come in. Yeah.
Harrowing thought.
Yep. Anyway, I don't want to make this episode 1,000 years long, so I'm just going to do a few comparisons, but please know that nearly all of the details about Holmes in The Devil in the White City are laughably incorrect when compared to the very well-researched account by Adam Seltzer in H.H. Holmes, The Devil in the White City. So there are so many obvious inaccuracies that I'm just going to choose a sampling. So we're going to talk about some famous ones. So we already touched upon the whole like building issues with the murder castle, where like it was never called the murder castle until well after Holmes was arrested. It was never a castle. It was not a hotel for murderers. It was never even a hotel. There's like almost every detail you probably think you know about this is wrong. And these are very, very well substantiated by Seltzer. Again, his book is so well referenced. It's so I can't talk about how great this book is. You got to read it or listen to the audiobook version. It's fantastic. I really think you'll feel very satisfied by the account Seltzer gives of Holmes. If, like most people, you picked up The Devil in the White City to read about the quote-unquote serial killer part, right? Like, read Seltzer's book. You're going to get the true account there. Anyway, so one of the more famous excerpts of this story that I think is just a beautiful, beautiful micro of the macro here is the Pharmacist and Drugstore Tale. So I'm going to read from Larson's book first. Then I'm going to read from Seltzer's book, and you will understand what I mean. So this is going to be a bit of a long read. I'm going to read like 2 pages, then another 2 pages, but I think it's worth it. So from The Devil in the White City, this is part of the chapter entitled The Necessary Supply. I'm going to read 35 to 37. One morning in August 1886, as heat rose from the streets with the intensity of a child's fever. God, Larson's so fucking dramatic. Sorry, that was me being frustrated. A man calling himself H.H. Holmes walked into one of Chicago's train stations. The air was stale and stiff, suffused with the scent of rotten peaches, horse excrement, and partially combusted Illinois anthracite. Half a dozen locomotives stood in the train yard, exhaling steam into the already yellowish sky. Holmes acquired a ticket to a village called Englewood in the town of Lake, a municipality of 200,000 people that abutted Chicago's southernmost boundary. The township encompassed the Union Stockyards and 2 large parks. Washington Park, with lawns, gardens, and a popular racetrack, and Jackson Park, a desolate, undeveloped wasteland on the lakeshore. Despite the heat, Holmes looked fresh and crisp. As he moved through the station, the glances of young women fell around him like wind-blown petals. Do you smell the bullshit on the air of the wind-blown petals?
You don't know that, man. Come on.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
He walked with confidence and dressed well, conjuring an impression of wealth and achievement. He was 26 years old. His height was 5 feet 8 inches. He weighed only 155 pounds. He had dark hair and striking blue eyes, once likened to the eyes of a mesmerist. "The eyes are very big and wide open," a physician named John L. Capon later observed. "They are blue. Great murderers, like great men in other walks of activity, have blue eyes." Capon also noted...
Okay, so we're believing that doctor is like, the blue eyes are the murderers because that doctor from the turn of the century.
But great men, you see. Capon also noted thin lips, tinted by a full dark mustache. What he found most striking, however, were Holmes's ears. It is a marvelously small ear, and at the top it is shaped and carved after the fashion in which old sculptors indicated deviltry and vice in the statues of satyrs. Overall, Capon noted...
This is a doctor saying this?
Yeah. Overall, Capon noted, he is made in a very delicate mold.
Imagine your doctor taking notes on you like that.
Yeah. I mean, this is like when they thought fucking people had, like, ghosts in their blood, right? So, you know, it kind of tracks.
Yeah, so we gotta catalog how carved out their features are and how big and wide their eyes are.
You know,
that's
think
how the
about
ghosts get in, if you have big, wide eyes.
But, you know, this is when, like, phrenology wasn't there, right? So, you know, all this sketchy pseudoscience stuff. To women as yet unaware of his private obsessions, it was an appealing delicacy. He broke prevailing rules of casual intimacy. He stood too close, stared too hard, touched too much and long, and women adored him for it. Again, what the fuck?
How do you know?
Yeah. He stepped from the train into the heart of Englewood and took a moment to survey his surroundings. He stood at the intersection of 63rd and Wallace. A telegraph pole at the corner held fire alarm box number 2475. In the distance rose the frames of several three-story homes under construction. He heard the concussion of hammers. Newly planted trees stood in soldierly ranks, but in the heat and haze they looked like desert troops gone too long without water. The air was still, moist, and suffused with the burned licorice scent of freshly rolled macadam. So wait a second. So if it's so hot and the trees look like they've gone without water, but it's also the air is moist, so like wouldn't the trees be fine if it was humid?
Well, no, that's water air, you know, instead of like the water that you just put on the trees that they're supposed to have. That doesn't work.
It's still weird. Like, either choose that it's like dusty and hot and dry, or it's humid and hot. Like, you know, just to choose one. Anyway. On the corner stood a shop with a sign identifying it as E.S. Holton Drugs. This is the important part, Chris and listeners at home. He walked. He came to Wentworth Street, which ran north and south and clearly served as Englewood's main commercial street, its pavement clotted with horses, drays, and phaetons. Who the fuck refers to a carriage as a phaeton? Sometimes...
I don't even know what that word is, man.
Sometimes Larson really uses, like, bizarrely archaic terminology, and it just makes me think that he just wants to sound smart. It's just a fucking carriage. It's the old Greek word for carriage. So I don't know why that, like...
Yeah, that's needless. Just say, if it's just you're using some Greek to be like, hey, I know the Greek word for carriage.
Yeah, there are just some times where he'll say stuff and it's like, I don't, like, what? Why are we using that? Or he'll, like, sometimes he describes Burnham the architect with, like, architectural terms, because I guess he thought that was, like, cool or something. I don't know.
Got a nice sturdy frame.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of buttresses. He's got a big buttress.
Yeah, right. Anyway. Sorry, I should really stop diverting myself. Near the corner of 63rd and Wentworth, he passed a fire station that housed engine company number 51. Next door was a police station. Years later, a villager with a blind spot for the macabre would write, "While at times there was considerable need of a police force in the Stockyards district, Englewood pursued the even tenor of its way with very little necessity for their appearance other than to ornament the landscape and see that the cows were not disturbed in their peaceful pastures." Holmes returned to Wallace Street, where he had seen the sign for Holton Drugs. Tracks crossed the intersection. A guard sat squinting against the sun, watching for trains, and every few minutes lowered a crossing gate as yet another locomotive huffed past. The drugstore was on the northwest corner of Wallace and 63rd. Across Wallace was a large vacant lot. Holmes entered the store and there found an elderly woman named Mrs. Holton. This is again important. He sensed vulnerability, sensed it the way another man might capture the trace of a woman's perfume. He identified himself as a doctor and licensed pharmacist and asked the woman if she needed assistance in her store. He spoke softly, smiled often, and held her in his frank, blue gaze. He was good with conversation, and soon she revealed to him her deepest sorrow. Her husband, upstairs in their apartment, was dying of cancer. She confessed that managing the store while caring for him had become a great burden. Holmes listened with moist eyes. He touched her arm. He could ease her burden, he said. Not only that, he could turn the drugstore into a thriving establishment and conquer the competition up the block. His gaze was so clear and blue. She told him she would have to talk to her husband. She walked upstairs. The day was hot. Flies rested on the windowsill. Outside, yet another train rumbled through the intersection. Cinder and smoke drifted like soiled gauze past the window. She would talk to her husband, yes, but he was dying, and she was the one who now managed the store and bore its responsibilities, and she had come to a decision. Just thinking about the young doctor gave her a feeling of contentment she had not experienced in a long while. Sorry, I have one other... Weirdly, this is like 10 pages later. It comes back to this, and it's important to read, so... Dr. Holton did die. Holmes made his widow an offer. He would buy the store, and she could continue to reside in the second-floor apartment. He couched his offer in prose that made it seem as if he were proposing the purchase, not to benefit himself, but solely to free the grieving Mrs. Holton from the burden of work. He touched her arm as he spoke. After she signed the deed over to him, he stood and thanked her with tears in his eyes. He financed the purchase mainly with money he raised by mortgaging the store's fixtures and stock, agreeing to repay the loan at a rate of $100 a month, about $3,000 in 21st century value. My trade was good, he said, and for the first time in my life I was established in a business that was satisfactory to me. He put up a new sign, H.H. Holmes Pharmacy. As word spread that a young, handsome, and apparently unmarried young doctor now stood behind the counter, an increasing number of single women in their 20s began to patronize the store. They dressed nicely and bought things they did not need. Longtime customers also liked the new proprietor, although they missed the comforting presence of Mrs. Holton. The Holtons had been there when their children were sick, had comforted them when these illnesses proved mortal. They knew Mrs. Holton had sold the place, but why had they not seen her around town? Holmes smiled and explained that she had decided to visit relatives in California, something she had long wanted to do but could never find the time or money to accomplish, and certainly could not have done with her husband on his deathbed. As time wore on and the inquiries dwindled, Holmes modified the story a bit. Mrs. Holton, he explained, liked California so much, she had decided to settle there. So, in this version of the tale, Holmes cons an old elderly woman into buying out her pharmacy from under her while her doctor husband dies upstairs. The husband dies, and then Holmes, even though he's already bought the business, kills the wife too, right? Like that's, I'm presuming you gathered that.
Yep.
All right. Now, we're going to switch over to Adam Seltzer's H.H. Holmes, The True Story of the White City Devil, and hear the actual truth of the matter. All right, I'm going to be reading from Chapter 2, Swindler. This is page 50 in the ebook. I don't know if that's the same as the printed, but it starts off with a quote. And for once, I like the quotes and the chapter titles in Seltzer's book because they are appropriate and purposeful. He never could carry on a conversation and at the same time look you in the face. When on the street, he usually walked with his eyes on the ground. Anonymous, University of Michigan classmate. And hey, you know what's at the end of classmate? A fucking footnote you can click on to see where that information came from. Anyway. Nearly every retelling of Holmes's career since the 1940s has told a chilling tale of how he came into possession of Holton's drugstore at 63rd and Wallace, across the street from the land he'd soon buy, by murdering the elderly Dr. Holton and his hapless wife. Though each story changes the details a bit, most begin with Holmes wandering into the pharmacy at 763rd quite by chance, perhaps seeking out a location that would be convenient to the upcoming World's Fair. There, he finds poor old Mrs. Holton, hopelessly out of her depth, trying to run pharmacy herself while her husband, the doctor, lies sick upstairs. She's only too happy to hire the charming, capable young man who calls himself Dr. Harry H. Holmes to take over the operations. Soon, the Holtons disappear, and Holmes tells everyone that they've sold him the store and moved away. That he killed one or both of them is generally implied, and sometimes even explicitly stated. This story was built from a few small bits of data about Dr. Holton that could be obtained by early retellers, then fleshed out by a pulp writer's imagination. A few 1890s newspapers and books spoke of Holmes buying a pharmacy from Mrs. Dr. Holton or Dr. E.S. Holton, and some told stories of Mrs. Holton having trouble getting Holmes to pay for the place, though details were very sparse. The most complete, roughly contemporary version of the story comes from G.A. Bogart, a jeweler in the neighborhood, who said, "From the first day he was engaged by Mrs. Holton to run the drugstore, which he afterward bought from her, he determined to have a business of his own, and to that end began carrying off the stock, piecemeal. Every time he left the store, he carried something away, and very materially reduced the stock before he made a bit of it. After he concluded his deal, he only paid his notes at the muzzle of a gun." Holmes wrote in his autobiography that he began working there in July 1886 when it was owned by a doctor who was in ill health and wished to sell. "A little later I bought it," he wrote, "paying for it for the most part with money secured by mortgaging the stock and fixtures, agreeing to repay this loan at the rate of $100 per month." No one in Englewood in the 1890s claimed that the Holtons had vanished, and writers who repeated the story that Holmes had killed the elderly doctor and his wife were missing one important piece of data. The Holtons were not an elderly doctor and his wife, but a young doctor and her husband. The 1886 Medical and Surgical Directory of the United States shows that the E.S. in E.S. Holton stood for Elizabeth Sarah, and records showed that she was still in her 20s when Holmes bought her pharmacy. She'd been at the University of Michigan a year before he arrived. Before moving to Chicago, Dr. Holton, then known as Lizzie Sanders, her maiden name, had spent a few years at the University of Michigan, where she last appears in records in 1880, a year before Holmes arrived. While their times there don't seem to have quite overlapped, it's possible that Holmes had met her if she made a return visit, and it's to be assumed that they had mutual acquaintances given that they were doctors who went to the same school. His calling on the store of a fellow Michigan alumni when he was looking for work was probably not a random chance, and certainly happened well before there was any talk of a World's Fair. It's possible that Dr. Holton decided to sell the pharmacy when she became pregnant with her second daughter in early 1887, though it's also likely that Holmes made arrangements to buy the place a bit earlier than that. The Holtons were still living in the neighborhood with their 2 children when Holmes was arrested in 1894. Far from disappearing, they both lived well into the 20th century and are buried at Oakwood Cemetery, not far from the site of the pharmacy. Still, it's strange that no reporter ever seems to have asked Dr. Holton about Holmes when they were interviewing everyone else in the area who'd ever passed him on the street. It may be that she was in mourning at the time and not interested in being interviewed. Investigations of the Holmes building began in July of 1895, and Dr. Holton's daughter, Abigail, had died of gastritis 2 months before. Though she does not seem to have gotten Holmes to pay her what he owed her eventually, and without even initiating a lawsuit, no lawsuit involving her has been found in the legal archives, many others fared far worse. In July 1887, while Holmes was running the drugstore, one George Bilski sold him a bill of goods, including a water bottle, barber pole, and towel rack. After learning that Holmes had a reputation as a man to whom one shouldn't extend credit, Bilski repossessed the goods a month later and filed a lawsuit. But he failed to go through the proper channels before repossessing, and the jury found in favor of Holmes.
Possession of a water bottle is
harsh. Records from the suit show that Holmes knew his way around a contract and how to exploit them. Anyway, as you can see, that story told by Larson is entirely wrong.
Not only that, Seltzer's version is much more concerned with piecing together a timeline by pointing out various documents, but Larson's is all about, I'm trying to create this emotional space that, I wholesale made up.
Yep. So to me, that's a really great, again, small example of, the larger problem. Let's move to much later in the tale, where this is during I'll just say the time of the Williams sisters. So Holmes kind of started shacking up with this lady, Minnie Williams, although it's hard to know whether they were actually romantically involved or if they were just partners in crime. It's very difficult to determine that, and it kind of seems like Minnie maybe knew what was up and was in on it too, but there's no real proof of that. Anyway, her sister comes to visit them in the summer of 1893, so the summer the World's Fair is actually happening. And her sister, Nanny, and there is a letter that survives that Nanny Williams wrote to her aunt, I believe. So I'm going to read you Larson's version of events, and then we'll go to Seltzer again, like we just did. On page 292 of Devil in the White City, Larson, in quotes, remember what he said about things in quotes. They are exact representations, right? Mm-hmm. In quotes, it says, Sister, Brother Harry, and myself will go to Milwaukee tomorrow, and we'll go to Old Orchard Beach, Maine, by the way of the St. Lawrence River. We'll visit 2 weeks in Maine, then on to New York. Brother Harry thinks I am talented. He wants me to look around about studying art. Then we sail for Germany, by way of London and Paris. If I like it, I will stay and study art. Brother Harry says you need never trouble any more about me, financially or otherwise. He and sister will see to me. Write me right away, she added, and address to Chicago, and the letter will be forwarded to me. Okay. Flip over to Seltzer.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And these are quotations that Larson is claiming?
That was all in quotations, which, as he told us in his foreword about how accurate and factual it was, anything in quotes is from a document, right? Reproduced in Seltzer's account, the letter... I'm just going to read it verbatim, including like the heading and stuff. So it says, 1220 Wrightwood Avenue, Chicago, Illinois, July 4th, 1893. Dear Aunt Lucy, I wrote you from Midlothian, Texas, saying I was coming here, and also as soon as I reached here, but have not heard from you. I have taken in the fair to my heart's content and have enjoyed it so much. Sister, Brother Harry, and myself go to Milwaukee tomorrow and will go to Old Orchard Beach, Maine, by way of the lakes and the St. Lawrence River. We'll spend about 2 weeks, and then we'll go down to New York for me to look around about studying art. Then we will sail for Germany by way of London and Paris. If I like, I will stay and study art. If not, I will return to New York in time to make you a visit before beginning my work. I can hardly realize that I am to have this great advantage, for which I have wished so long. Brother Harry says you need never trouble any more about me, financially or otherwise. He and sister will see to me. I hope our hard days are over. We'll write you again as soon as we are settled. Write me right away and address to Chicago, and the letter will be forwarded to me. Your loving niece, Nanny Williams. Note that the Seltzer letter is both more complete and also lacks a telling line from the Larson version. So Larson's version includes this line that is not in the letter. That says, sorry, I had to flip back. Brother Harry thinks I am talented. He wants me to look around about studying art. That's not in the letter, but he represents it in his book as having been in the fucking letter. Unless Seltzer's lying too, which I highly doubt.
Seems such a weird choice to just like include. Like that's like I'm lying a little bit to get away with it, like pathologically.
Well, the two options are he intentionally added the line, which I think is unlikely. The likelier option is that he referenced a text, but not the original letter. Like he didn't actually go to the primary documentation. He probably relied on someone else saying this is what the letter says when he didn't actually look at the fucking letter. Like, he just went on what somebody else said about the letter. So that's another, like, glaring problem, and what makes me question all of Larson's research is stuff like that. You know, and then there's, like, the way that he, dramatizes things. I think I'll just read this, so, I should say that we do know that, you know, as Nanny said, she was able to go to the fair. So she wrote this letter on July 4th. She said that they had gone to the fair, but I don't know if they would have gone earlier in the day and then she came home and wrote the letter. I mean, I feel like it's more likely that they probably went the day before. Anyway, it's hard to know exactly what day they went, but it was just she and Holmes because Minnie, her sister, was like, I don't know, she had to leave the city for a couple days. And so Holmes and Nanny went to the fair by themselves. But the way that Larson talks about their trip to the fair is something. Oh, yeah, that's the other problem with Larson's depiction. So Larson depicts Holmes, Minnie, and Nanny all going to the fair together, but Minnie wasn't there. Based on documentation at the time of where she had been and the dates that they could have possibly gone to the fair, she wasn't there with them. So that's another problem in his account. But I'll just read a bit of it so you can kind of get a feel for what I hate about this writing. The Great Fair came next. They rode the Alley L along 63rd Street. Just before the train entered the fairgrounds, it passed the arena of Buffalo Bill's Wild West. From the elevated trestle, they saw the earthen floor of the arena and the amphitheater seating that surrounded it. They saw his horses and buffalo and an authentic stagecoach. The train passed over the fair's fence, then descended to the terminal at the rear of the transportation building. Brother Harry paid the 50-cent admission for each of them. At the fair's turnstiles, even Holmes could not escape paying cash. Naturally, they first toured the transportation building. They saw the Pullman Company's Ideal of Industry exhibit with its detailed model of Pullman's company town, which the company sold as a worker's paradise. In the building's annex, packed with trains and locomotives, they walked the full length of an exact duplicate of the all-Pullman New York and Chicago Limited, with its plush chairs and carpeting, crystal glassware, and polished wood walls. At the pavilion of the Inman line, a full-size slice of an ocean liner towered above them. They exited the building through the great golden door, which arced across the light red face of the building like a gilt rainbow. Now, for the first time, he talks about Nanny as Anna. Her name was Nanny. Her name was never Anna. It's another problem where, like, people who have retold these stories over and over just start changing details, and, her name is not Anna. That's another problem in the Larson text.
All right, sure, why not?
Anna, Nanny, got a sense of the true vast scale of the fair. Ahead lay a broad boulevard that skirted on the left the lagoon and the wooded island. On the right, the tall facades of the mines and electricity buildings. In the distance, she saw a train whooshing over the fair's all-electric elevated railway along the park's perimeter. Closer at hand, silent electric launches glided through the lagoon. At the far end of the boulevard, looming like an escarpment in the Rockies, stood the manufacturers and liberal arts building. White gulls slid across its face. The building was irresistibly huge. Holmes and Minnie took her there next. Once inside, she saw that the building was even more vast than its exterior had led her to believe. Yada yada. Okay, I'll skip over some paragraphs.
Right.
Minnie and Anna rapidly grew tired. They exited with relief onto the terrace over the North Canal and walked into the Court of Honor. Here, once again, Anna found herself nearly overwhelmed. It was noon by now, the sun directly overhead. Yada yada. Yada yada. They returned to the fair almost daily, 2 weeks being widely considered the minimum needed to cover it adequately. One of the most compelling buildings given the nature of the... Like, how does he know they went to the fair daily? Like, he doesn't know that.
They hid all the tick stubs from them? So he found them all.
They exited the Midway and strolled slowly back to 63rd Street in the Alley L. They were tired, happy, and sated, but Harry promised to bring them back one more time on July 4th for a fireworks display that everyone expected would be the greatest the city had ever witnessed. Okay, so this was before July 4th, so I don't know. Maybe they all went together at one point. Maybe. But...
Okay.
Brother Harry seemed delighted with Anna and invited her to stay for the summer. No, there was a letter from Minnie to Nanny saying, why don't you stay with us for the summer? And that's why Nanny ended up there. He didn't then extend the invitation after she was already there. Ugh. Flattered, she wrote home to request that her big trunk be shipped to the Wrightwood address. Clearly, she hoped something like this would happen, for she had packed the trunk already. Anyway... Maybe they all went to the fair together, but, like, it's just, but the problem is that, like, he writes it as though it's fact, right? And not that he writes the invented parts the same way he writes the factual parts. So it's all jumbled up together and impossible to know.
This would all be fine if he was like, maybe this could have happened.
Right, yeah, like, well, since it was common that it took many days to see the fair, maybe they went several times, and here's some of the stuff they could have seen. But instead, he states it as though he knows it, which he doesn't. He doesn't know it. No one does. All right. Overall, this book sets out to say that the Chicago World's Fair changed America and suggests in the back of the book blurb that Burnham and Holmes were two large reasons why, and I am just not on board. So... I feel like as you're reading the book, you're kind of wondering, you're like, how did this change America? I don't really get it. Like, he's not leading you along to get to those conclusions. So at the very end, he just tells you, which I will read to you.
Okay.
Page 373. The fair had a powerful and lasting impact on the nation's psyche, in ways both large and small. Walt Disney's father, Elias, helped build the White City. Walt's Magic Kingdom may well be a descendant. That is not fucking true. I'm going to say it again. I know I already said it. That is something that Larson thinks could have happened, and there's no evidence for it. Okay, continuing. Certainly the fair made a powerful impression on the Disney family. Oh my fucking god. It proved such a financial... sorry, I forgot this part starts off with Disney stuff. It proved such a financial boon that when the family's third son was born that year, Elias, in gratitude, wanted to name him Columbus. His wife Flora intervened. The baby became Roy. Walt came next on December 5th, 1901. Again, 1901 is not 1890... It's not before 1893. Anyway, the writer L. Frank Baum and his artist partner William Wallace Denslow visited the fair. Its grandeur informed their creation of Oz. I actually did not check to see if that was true. I don't know. The Japanese temple on the wooded island charmed Frank Lloyd Wright and may have influenced the evolution of his prairie residential designs. Again, I don't know. He says may have influence, which to me sounds like this is made up. The fair prompted President Harrison to designate October 12th a national holiday, Columbus Day, which today serves to anchor a few thousand parades in a 3-day weekend. Every carnival since 1893 has included a midway and a Ferris wheel. Every carnival! Larson has inventoried every single carnival known to man from 1893 to today, and they all have a midway and a Ferris wheel, Chris. Did you know that? Every single fucking carnival?
I don't know. How many carnivals were there? Was it like a lot of them? Or was it...
It's just like...
Can you even for sure count that?
That's what I mean. It's the phrasing is so uncareful and clumsy that it leads to these suppositions that are just... And every grocery store contains products born at the exposition. Shredded wheat survived. Every house has scores of incandescent bulbs powered by alternating current, both of which first proved themselves worthy of large-scale use at the fair. I don't know if shredded wheat proved worthy of large-scale use at the fair. That's a weird way to say that.
Still here, Paris. That's the point there. And also, electricity is because of the World Fair. I know that's not really what he's trying to say there, but like that.
It kind of is, though.
But still. It's hyperbolic.
Yeah, and nearly every town of any size has its little bit of ancient Rome, some beloved and becolumned bank, library, or post office, covered with graffiti perhaps, or even an ill-conceived coat of paint, but underneath it all, the glow of the White City persists. Even the Lincoln Memorial in Washington can trace its heritage to the fair. Bro, people were making Ionic columns before the World's Fair. Like, I don't know. What the fuck?
Maybe it was at the World's Fair because it was kind of popular at the time and sort of was so around when we built a lot of those things.
Right, and like, I don't doubt that this great architectural achievement influenced other architecture, right? Like, of course, I believe that. That, of course. But like, just the specificity and the grandness that he puts on these things is just, it's not right. The fair's greatest impact lay in how it changed the way Americans perceived their cities and their architects. It primed the whole of America, not just a few rich architectural patrons, to think of cities in a way they never had before. Elihu Root said the fair led our people out of the wilderness of the commonplace to new ideas of architectural beauty and nobility. Henry Damaris Lloyd saw it as revealing to the great mass of Americans possibilities of social beauty, utility, and harmony of which they had not been able even to dream. No such vision could otherwise have entered into the prosaic drudgery of their lives, and it will be felt in their development into the third and fourth generation. The fair taught men and women steeped only in the necessary to see that cities did not have to be dark, soiled, and unsafe bastions of the strictly pragmatic. They could also be beautiful. So, like, while I'm tempted to believe that, all the other problems with this book make me question it. And that's like one of the biggest problems. It's like, I don't know what to trust anymore.
You poison the well like that. Yeah. How am I supposed to believe anything?
Yeah. And like, I don't know anything about architecture, to be honest. I know nothing. So like, maybe that's true, but I don't know. William Stead recognized the power of the fair immediately. The vision of the White City and its profound contrast to the Black City drove him to write If Christ Came to Chicago, a book often credited with launching the City Beautiful movement, which sought to elevate American cities to the level of the great cities of Europe. Okay, fine. Like Stead, civic authorities throughout the world saw the fair as a model of what to strive for. They asked Burnham to apply the same citywide thinking that had gone into the White City to their own cities. He became a pioneer in modern urban planning. Okay, cool. He created citywide plans for Cleveland, San Francisco, and Manila, and led the turn-of-the-century effort to resuscitate and expand L'Enfant's vision of Washington, D.C. In each case, he worked without a fee. So, like, he's telling... But again, like, he's spending a chapter at the very end telling us this. Like, why... I didn't read the rest of the book and then come to that conclusion, right? Mm-hmm. It just seems a little disjointed. I kind of wish that he had led us to those conclusions without having to just exposition us at the end, right? Like, and then, I don't know, he's like, yeah, we're America, because we had, like, juicy fruit gum and PBR at the fair, and it's like, okay, I don't know. And then he makes, I think in 2 or 3 passages, talks about how workers on the fair did some organizing and kind of did some work for labor rights because they had to push back against the pretty inhumane conditions of their work at the fair. And, like, yes, of course, labor rights movement was big at that time. I mean, this is when you had The Jungle, like, that book was, you know, like, all these accounts of the misery of laboring in a city like this and the poor, the working poor. So I'm sure that had something to do with it, but I don't know. Honestly, it all kind of feels a little bit like a sleight of hand trick. The whole thing. I mean, like, are we changed because we got juicy fruit gum and Ferris wheels? Like, I get that the architecture stuff had an effect because he tells us that later, and I'm like, okay, I see how that works, but all the rest of it, I don't know. Furthermore, the biggest problem here is I don't get how the Holmes part changed anything about America. He just seemed like another con man murderer at a time when plenty of these men were about. Like, the only thing special about Holmes is just the myths that built up around him due to his own lies and the lies of others and misinformation and disinformation. He was not America's first serial killer, nor a serial killer at all by definition, as he did not kill based on compulsion as far as evidence suggests. Early American serial killers instead include people like the Harp brothers, Patty Cannon, Samuel Green, Delphine Lalaurie, John Johnston, and plenty of others before this time period.
As I suspected.
Yeah, so, you know, the idea that he's a serial killer is a complete invention because we don't have any reason to believe that Holmes killed the people he killed because he wanted to, like, jerk off to people dying. Like, there's no evidence of that. And it's not like he was killing on a schedule or a certain type of person. In fact, like, as I said much earlier in this episode, there's very little to tie him to all the murders that he's associated with. At the end of Seltzer's book, he gives a good rundown of, like, the murders you can definitely connect to him, the murders you can maybe connect to him, and then the ones that have, like, no evidence at all. And then a huge list of all the people that Holmes said he murdered who were actually alive. So it's just a mess.
Yep. Key detail.
All right. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to character quality. Look, the author is, like, really horny for blue eyes and is kind of seems to be a little horny for the architect.
I have noticed that.
Yeah. It's like we're a little horny for the architect. We're a little horny for Holmes. Everyone is horny for Holmes in the book. Chris, how much money would you like to bet that Larson himself has blue eyes? Because that's something that I started to wonder by the end of it.
Yeah, I gotta say, the obsession is strange.
It's a very weird convention to kind of wrap your book around. I'm gonna look up a picture. Does he have blue eyes? Drum roll, please. Yes, he does.
Wow. You did it, Paris. Wow.
So unsurprising. You know, and it is just hard to enjoy the characterizations provided in the book by Larson because they just feel, I don't know, clumsy, cheesy, invented. As, you know, and I read some of that, you know, for you. And even Chris, you were like scoffing and making faces when I was reading earlier. So I feel like this isn't a me problem. To be fair, there is evidence to stand on for some of the people based on things written at the time. You know, for example, Ruth's sister-in-law, who was in love with him, wrote a biography about him in 1896 and also talked about him in her memoir, which gave Larson and the reader, of course, by proxy, a lot of day-to-day details and character descriptions for the architect sections, because, of course, she talked about Burnham as well. So, there's some parts that are probably fine. Little snippet here real quick.
Okay.
So, page 97. The architects returned from their tour, discouraged and full of regret. They gathered again in the firm's library, where Root, suddenly revitalized, now joined them. He was gracious, funny, warm. If anyone could sway these men and ignite their passion, Burnham knew Root was the one. Root invited the outside men to come to his house on Astor Place the next day, Sunday, for high tea, then went home at last to greet his children and his wife, Dora, who, according to Harriet Monroe, was in bed, ill almost unto death from a recent miscarriage. Root told Dora of his weariness and suggested that in the coming summer they should escape somewhere for a long rest. The last months had been full of frustration and long nights of work and travel. He was exhausted. The trip south had done nothing to ease his stress. He looked forward to the end of the week, January 15th, when the architects would conclude their conference and go home. After the 15th, he told his wife, I shall not be so busy. So from there, we're pulling from Harriet Monroe's biography of him. We're pulling from letters at the time, totally fine. It's really mostly the Holmes stuff that's really bad, but I will say there is one person in the Holmes saga who I think is correctly characterized based on letters and interviews with her family and colleagues at the time, and that's Emmeline Cigrand. She was potential girlfriend number 4. If you're keeping track at home, I'll just read a couple little excerpts so we can get a sense of her. This passage talks about someone named Peitzel. He was just another associate of Holmes, who Holmes would later murder and be arrested for murdering. That's a little bit of context. So, page 162. Peitzel returned to Englewood in April. The psychotropic powers of Keeley's injections may account for the story Peitzel now told Holmes of how at Keeley he had met a young woman of great beauty, to hear him tell it, preternatural beauty, named Emmeline Cigrand. She was blonde, 24 years old, and since 1891 had worked as a stenographer in Dr. Keeley's office. Peitzel's almost hallucinatory description must have tantalized Holmes, for he wrote to Cigrand and offered her a job as his personal secretary, at twice the salary she was making in Keeley. A flattering offer, as a member of the Cigrand family later described it. So, interestingly enough, some of that is fact, and some of that is, I think, Larson's fiction, because Keeley's injections didn't have psychotropic powers. They were just bullshit. It was a fake cure at the time for alcoholism. It didn't really work. They just said, we're going to inject you with gold and it's going to cure your alcoholism. And people were like, hell yeah. So the fact,
sure, sounds right to me.
Saying that those injections were psychotropic, I think, is a stretch. I mean, of course, at this time, medicine was kind of bullshit anyway. So maybe sometimes they were getting things that were, I don't know, like that, but I doubt it. Talking about how, and this says that Peitzel told Holmes about how hot she was and she was blonde, blah, blah. There's no evidence that Peitzel told Holmes about her and then Holmes wrote to her after that. We don't actually know how that happened. It's more likely that Holmes went to scoop Peitzel up at Dr. Keeley's and met her there. So this whole idea that Peitzel is the one who told him and had a hallucinatory description, that's just Larson inventing stuff. Still, all right. This is a big old -1 for plot construction. Oh boy. All right.
Oh my God. We're at the end of that one. Took forever, dude.
I know.
Holy shit.
All right. Moment to moment. Let's talk about prose quality. It's competent, but not especially great. As you've probably heard in my earlier passage readings, there's a skill with the written word, but it can be pretty cheesy at times and far too heavy on embellishment. I don't think I need to read any more passages. You get what I'm putting down here. And again, one of my big problem is that he writes the fluffed up parts that he's sort of guessing at the same way he writes the factual parts.
That's the mortal sin here, right?
Yeah.
That's truly the mortal sin amongst all this.
Yeah, and it's just you could just say, based on X and Y, this could have played out like this, and then write your fucking fanfic scene, right? Just give people a heads up.
It's really as easy as that.
Yeah. I mean, but then the other problem is that his X's and Y's aren't particularly fact-checked or correct, so,
the
that
whole graph should really get drawn up again. The non-Euclidean X and Y dimension.
Yeah, so it leads him to writing these scenes that, like, maybe could have happened, but, like, he's really... they just come across as more true than they really are, which is a huge problem. For dialogue, I guess we can talk about quotes. You know, there's quotes sometimes. They're used pretty extensively, but it's hard for me. Like, I'm sitting here questioning their veracity just because I've kind of poked through some holes and found oceans in other parts of the book, and so it just makes me wonder, are these quotes right? Did they come from reputable sources? So, I don't know. There are a lot of quotes, but whether they're true or not is another matter. I'm gonna give this a 0 from moment to moment, because it books, but it's not great.
Oh, that one was a breeze in comparison to all the stuff we had to untangle in the previous section.
Treeblo's presence. All right, chaos levels. Oh boy, fucking total chaos in terms of the writing and the concept. I'm floored that
all
this
these
was
fact
published.
crimes, really.
Yeah, I am floored that this was published by a major publisher and won an award for best fact crime and like other awards.
Well, I mean, it feels deserved to me, to be honest with you.
It is a crime of fact. It's true. But I mean, the beginning of this is all the acclaim for this book. It's like the San Francisco Chronicle, Newsweek, People, Elle, the Boston Globe, Houston Chronicle, Denver Post, just all these publications being like, this is such a fucking good book. And it's like, did none of you question any of this? I can't believe that. It's just wild how, like, the moment one reputable source lifts you up, the rest of them fall in line, and nobody goes back to be like, I wonder if that's actually true. It's fucked up. I mean, the levels? How many times did I have to stop, go back, and read again? Holy shit, so many times! I spent the whole month on this thing. The please helps. I did send a few please helps to Chris. Yeah,
and the antiques freaks a little bit as well.
Oh, yeah.
So, like, reaching out to multiple people for a lifeline.
Yeah, this is a big old negative one. Treeblo was here. All right. Should this exist? All right, let's move on to the should this exist question. So, number 1, would readers of this genre enjoy this? Maybe if you're a person who likes pop history books. I found it hard to read because I could smell the bullshit immediately and confirmed much of it through simultaneous research. However, I'm sure many people enjoyed this because they trusted Larson and all the accolades printed on and within the book. But let me tell you, folks, Larson took you for all you're worth for a good 1/3 of this book, at least as all the stuff relates to Holmes. Again, there are other things, as I pointed out, in the Chicago and World's Fair passages that are also an invention or potentially an invention, but I couldn't pick through all of this. I only had a month. I have a day job. I have a spouse who was injured pretty badly. So, like, I did what I could in the time I had.
It's honestly fantastic work, Paris.
Oh, thank you. I credit all of this to Adam Seltzer and his fantastic and well-researched, well-documented work to write his book. All right. Do we feel as if the author's goal was met? Probably, because I'm sure Larson's made lots of money on this. But the byline of the title, if you remember, was Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America. And I just feel like that subtitle never really bears this conceptual fruit by the end of the book. All I can kind of surmise is, like, America was changed by this, because, I don't know, juicy fruit and a big old wheel, and, like, he does...
With columns.
Yeah. He does give us that chapter at the end, which I read pieces from, where he's like, well, this is how it changed America, but I don't know. I could have just read that and not read the rest of the book. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't... He doesn't help the reader come to those conclusions, which is what a good author should do, I think, my opinion. So it's a little piecemeal and weird. Does it add anything new, interesting, or novel? I guess not, because, I don't know how much the Burnham and World's Fair stuff differs from other extant works about the Chicago World's Fair. Like, I'm not a Chicago World's Fair historian, so I don't really know about that part. But, oh boy, the Holmes parts were not properly fact-checked, and instead just added unearned solidity to myths and lies about Holmes and bolstered general American myth-making, which I am very not in favor of. Oh boy. Did it take something from us? Yeah, Yeah, this book made me fucking nuts. I hated it so much. I spent an entire month reading this and researching for this episode. Happy fucking birthday to me yesterday. My gift to myself to be done with this.
Congratulations.
Yes. What should someone read instead of this? Well, since nobody is here for the architects, just read H.H. Holmes' The True History of the White City Devil by Adam Seltzer so you can get the actual Holmes facts that you're probably lusting after and not this poorly researched fantasy that Larson has written. I found the audiobook of Seltzer's version pretty pleasant, albeit a little pricey. It was like $26, which is kind of a lot for an audiobook. Thank you, patrons, for your support so that we can
thank you.
That. I think the ebook is less than that. I'm not sure, but Seltzer deserves all the praise Larson has accrued in his hoard in the last 23 years because he really did the work to write a good account of Holmes, one that feels far more true to history than what Larson has spun on top of centuries of lies. All right, can we fix it? Absolutely.
Oh, wait. You have to score should this exist, Paris.
Oh.
And then we score the whole thing. Hate to be a roadblock in this lengthy episode, but...
No, it's a -1. Fuck it. -1. All right.
Okay. So in that case, it was 0? Was it 1? It was 1 for technical construction because that wasn't that bad.
No, it was 0. It was 0.
Oh, it was 0 for that one. Okay, it was -1 for plot construction. It was 0 for moment to moment. It was -1 for Cereblo's presence, and it was -1 for should this exist. A -3 out of 5.
That sounds about right. All right.
Rubric is still working.
Can we fix it? Yes. This was a cool idea, but the desire to craft a narrative overtook the truth. I just need authors like this to be more upfront with readers about the length and breadth of the liberties they're taking with history and something like this. The way he talks about this at the beginning is a literary crime, if you ask me. Like, remember when I read page 11 or like numeral 11 or whatever?
That's why it won the award.
Please consult primary sources and also compare them to each other and try to determine the quality of the sources in addition to their position to the event taking place. Don't take sources for granted. Always try to cross-reference and support as much as you can. Lastly, don't fall so in love with the character you're creating in your mind that you lose sight of what was most likely true based on the facts. I know we're trying to entertain people here, but the truth is plenty strange on its own, so there's no need to rely on bad sources and lies, especially in this case. Stuff like this really makes me furious, and I hate that this book has become canon because apparently only Adam Seltzer had the thought to refute the myths around Holmes in the last 20 plus years. The whole book feels like a con straight out of 1893 because the substance of this book is about the construction and operation of the fair and not magic, mystery, or murder, really. Sure, some murders happen, but the Holmes angle really feels like it's just to get people to pick up a book they otherwise wouldn't if it was exclusively about the fair. I should mention, the only murders that can be concretely tied to Holmes didn't occur in Chicago.
Well, that's the fun little cherry on top there.
Yep. Oh, all right. Again, folks, I have glossed over a lot. I have skipped a lot of things just to make this episode happen.
Please, you should have glossed more, I think. No, I'm joking. That was a wonderful presentation there, Paris. Thank you so much. Round of applause to Paris for
thank you, Adam Seltzer, the man of the hour. Thank you, sir. If folks have questions or want to know a little bit more about things that I skipped or glossed over, feel free to send a question in, send a comment. Oh, we are on Blue Sky and Tumblr now. You can reach us on those two places, at those two places, if you are escaping from the metaverse, like many.
And, thank you, Paris, for all that. And thank you as well to our patrons and Ko-fi donors who helped buy that audiobook. Shout out to our lurkers on Patreon who aren't currently donating, but who still grace us with their watchful gaze, like 50, Anna, Anya, Arant, BB89, Carol, Caroline, Eldridge, Nemo, George, Gray, Jan, Katie, Kirsten, Last Man on Earth 1, Robin, Samantha, Throttle19, and Zoe. And our paying members like our bad bookworms, Ben, Donnie, Emily, Jakub, Jared, Scott, and Will, our exacting editors. Please welcome Elliot and Xander to the exacting editors. Woo! Along with mainstays of the exacting editors, Kieran, David, D, Emmy, Funny, Robot with Antennas, Greg, Harry, Simon, Martin, Root Beer, Cutie, and the Ugly One. Below some librarians like Veronica, Beast with the Least, Yanka, Luchek, Patricia, Julius, and Of the Void, the Taco Eating Unicorn of the Hot Springs. And finally, our pesky publisher is Miles May, Austin, Patrick, and Fred. And of course, our Ko-fi donors like Mark, Tracy, our ever-faithful Kiwi Thing, and Excavating Lizard, along with Martin F. Brenna and Matthew, who relieved us of terrible books. If you want some terrible books we've read for the show, you can buy them over on our Ko-fi page. Paris, would you sell that copy of Devil in the White City with all of your notes still in it for extra money?
Oh, it would be worth a lot. I wouldn't want to let this baby go. That's a lot of work.
Start your bidding, people.
It would take a lot to make me part with that little guy.
All right, Paris. Well, I'm off to go be great because I got blue eyes, so I'm handsome and I can be great. So this made me feel pretty good. I think I'm gonna get away with a lot of stuff.
Actually, you're right. As a member of the Blue Eye Club, I guess I too can swindle and be hot as I wish. I'm off to be hot and swindle.
That's all it takes.
In the American tradition.
Swindling and serving out here. Paris and Chris, Terrible Book Club. All right, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
All
Bye.
Right. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Terrible Book Club. Terrible Book Club is an independent podcast produced by your hosts, Paris and Chris. Sound design and audio editing by Chris, with sound effects and music by Epidemic Sound and sometimes also Chris. Our theme song is Kiss by Yearn, which is, you guessed it, actually also Chris. You can find more of his soothing synthy sounds on Bandcamp at yearn.bandcamp.com. Do you want us to review a book of your choice on the show? Do you want access to some extra audio-visual weirdness? If so, become a patron at patreon.com/terriblebookclub. If you'd like to send us a one-time tip instead, you can do that at ko-fi.com/terriblebookclub. You can also support TBC for free by sharing the show on social media, following our accounts on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, or Goodreads, telling your friends about your favorite episode, or by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, or anywhere else on the internet. To send us book recommendations or your adorable pet photos, send an email to terriblebookclub@gmail.com.